Catherine West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Secretary of State for Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs if he will make a statement on the impact of the Hong Kong extradition law on the Sino-British Joint Declaration.
Minister Mark Field.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK Government remains acutely aware of our enduring responsibility towards Hong Kong as one of the joint signatories of the 1984 Joint Declaration that established the principle of one country, two systems. This principle, underpinned by the common law system provides Hong Kong with the foundations for its continued success as a truly global financial centre and a prosperous world city. Let me turn to the current issues around the ramifications of the Hong Kong government's contentious proposals to change their extradition laws. Yesterday's huge protest march, peaceful right up until the end, was a clear demonstration of the strength of feeling in Hong Kong about this issue. Hong Kong's Chief Executive, Carrie Lam, has insisted that new legislation is needed to close a loophole that has prevented a Hong Kong national accused of murdering another Hong Kong national, but in Taiwan, from facing justice. Yet the Taiwanese administration also opposes the changes. Civil society, business and legal groups in Hong Kong have expressed the strongest of concerns about both the content of the proposals and the very short consultation period. Many fear, above all, that Hong Kong nationals and residents risk being pulled into China's legal system, which can involve lengthy pre-trial detentions, televised confessions, and an absence of many of the judicial safeguards that we see in Hong Kong and indeed, of course, in the UK. Whilst we welcome recent efforts by the Hong Kong government to react to the unprecedented level of public concern, we understand that of the 7 million living in Hong Kong, between 300,000 and 1 million were on the streets yesterday. The FCO is clear that the changes that they have proposed fail to address fully a number of the core issues that we and others have raised. The UK government has been unequivocal in its views. From the outset, the Consul General, Andy Hayne, and my officials have been raising concerns with the Hong Kong government, with members of the Hong Kong Legislative Council and the Executive Council at all levels. We have also had full and detailed discussions with Chief Executive Carrie Lam, both bilaterally and as part of an EU démarche. And on the 30th of May, the Foreign Secretary issued a joint statement with his Canadian counterpart on the potential impact of the proposals on our citizens in Hong Kong, including, of course, in business confidence and on Hong Kong's international reputation. Some Hong Kong lawmakers have proposed an array of alternative solutions, including the additional legally binding human rights safeguards be included in the proposed legislation. In my own meeting here in London on the 20th of May with the Hong Kong Secretary for Commerce and Economic Development, Edward Yao, I made clear that proper consideration must be given to all these suggestions as part of a wider and more comprehensive consultation. More time for consultation would, of course, allow, we believe, for a more adequate consensus to be built. As the House will be aware, the operation of the court system in mainland China is, of course, very different from that applies in Hong Kong. There are widespread concerns that the fear of extradition to China might cause a chilling effect upon Hong Kong's rights and freedoms and might result in increased self-censorship. Mr. Speaker, we shall therefore continue to stress to the Hong Kong and Chinese authorities that for confidence in the one country, two systems to be maintained, Hong Kong must enjoy the full measure of the high degree of autonomy and rule of law as set out in both the Joint Declaration and enshrined in basic law.
Catherine West.
Mr. Speaker, it's very disappointing to see that the Secretary of State couldn't make it to the chamber for 1 million Hong Kong residents who took to the streets yesterday to protest against their government's proposed extradition bill. And if enacted, this law would allow suspected criminals to be extradited to mainland China, bypassing Hong Kong's independent legal system. Over the past few weeks, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, the business community, civil society organisations, the Hong Kong Bar Association and the International Chamber of Commerce have all expressed deep concern that this bill will erode further the one country, two systems model. The law courts in mainland China are seen as an arm of the state. Forced confession is frequently practised, and activists often fear imprisonment for crimes they have not committed. Hong Kong's common law system is not open to such abuse, as the Minister mentioned in his introductory remarks, and although it is under pressure, the separation of powers remains more or less intact. The amendments to the extradition law would significantly compromise this firewall which separates these sharply different systems. Mr. Speaker, in recent times we've watched with great unease as political and civic freedoms are put under increasing strain. These freedoms are guaranteed under the Basic Law, a core component of the Sino-British Joint Declaration. And as the co-signatory to this treaty, which is registered at the United Nations, the government has a legal duty to ensure that it is upheld. To conclude, the last Governor of Hong Kong, the Noble Lord Barnes, said that this bill's provisions are an assault on Hong Kong's values, stability and security. They create fear and uncertainty at a time when we should all be working to safeguard Hong Kong's reputation as one of the world's greatest business and cultural centres in the world. Does the Minister agree with his colleague's assessment, and will he outline how the government intends to address this issue in the immediate future, alongside long-standing concerns over the erosion of Hong Kong, of democratic principles in Hong Kong? We have a long and enduring history with Hong Kong, with lasting political, economic and cultural ties. And as we mark the 21st anniversary of handover next month, it's crucial that we keep our promise that Hong Kong will never walk alone.
Minister.
I thank the Honourable Lady for Hornsey and Wood Green for the tone of her discussions. She will be aware from discussions that we've had, and I have visited Hong Kong twice in my time already as a Minister, that we do understand many of the concerns raised by Lord Barnes, Lord Patten of Barnes, and indeed in her own contribution, and in particular the concerns that are raised as they are in the six-monthly report. Not without some controversy do we continue to have a six-monthly report, but the most recent six-monthly report did state that whilst we do believe that one country, two systems is working well, in the areas of civil and political freedoms, Hong Kong's high degree of autonomy is being reduced. May I say this, in relation to the Joint Declaration as a whole? 3 years ago, in 2016, we called on a breach of the Joint Declaration following the involuntary removal of the Causeway booksellers from Hong Kong to the mainland. This was the first and, to date, only time we have called upon a breach. But it is very clear that these events are getting close, if not just to the spirit, but also to the letter of the Joint Declaration. It is a good example, I fear, also of difficult law being, or bad cases making for tough law, as I alluded to. There is a loophole, potential loophole, but it is interesting that it is not a loophole that the Taiwanese authorities have asked to be sorted out. But inevitably, there is a fact that a Hong Kong national is being accused of a very serious crime in murder, and there is clearly no extradition prospect. But it does open, as the Honourable Lady rightly points out, a potential much broader extradition concern that is raised. And as I mentioned in my initial comments, one of the biggest concerns, of course, is that particularly at a time when President Xi has got a strong anti-corruption campaign in place, that the risk is that individuals could get caught up in this in a very inadvertent way. And whilst there are proposed safeguards to raise to the extradition level, not being 3 but being up as much as a 7-year custodial sentence, nonetheless it still does raise the very deep concerns that the Honourable Lady referred to.
Fiona Bruce.
Lord Patten has said that the deliberate decision to exclude any extradition agreement between Hong Kong and mainland China in 1997 was not a loophole, but was a deliberate decision in order to protect the autonomy of Hong Kong and the firewall between Hong Kong and China. Does the Minister agree that if countries internationally speak with one voice, expressing concerns about this issue, then there's likely to be more impact? What is the UK doing to join with other like-minded countries in order to express such concerns?
May I thank my honourable friend for Congleton. I know she takes a great interest in matters to do broadly with China, but also very specifically with Hong Kong, and I pay tribute to her very detailed and very steadfast work in that regard. Yes, I think she is right. This is something where we need to work together as an international community. But it is perhaps fair to put on the record that obviously there are already some extradition arrangements between some countries and Hong Kong, but obviously we are deeply concerned that this particular law being brought into place provides a much more general overview, particularly obviously as it engages the Chinese mainland. But I would again, if I may reiterate what my Right Honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, and his Canadian counterpart, Christiana Friedland, said as recently as the 30th of May. It was this: it is vital that extradition arrangements in Hong Kong are in line with one country, two systems, and fully respect Hong Kong's high degree of autonomy.
Helen Goodman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, for granting this urgent question. I also want to congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Hornsey and Wood Green, for securing it. I share her profound concern about these extradition laws, as evidently do hundreds of thousands of Hong Kong citizens who took to the streets over the weekend. These laws constitute not just an erosion, but a fundamental breach of the Sino-British Declaration and the one country, two systems principle it enshrines. They threaten the judicial independence of Hong Kong. The warning signs have been coming for several years now. We've seen an increasing crackdown on dissent and protest. Now we face the prospect of a direct line between Beijing and Hong Kong's courts that could see Hong Kongers sent thousands of miles away to face trial in mainland China's flawed criminal justice system. The UK does not have an extradition treaty with China, so why has the government done next to nothing? The Joint Declaration is a legally binding treaty registered with the UN, and the British government is the joint guarantor with China of the rights of Hong Kong citizens. Moreover, there are 170,000 British national overseas passport holders, many of whom reside in Hong Kong. The concessions offered by the Hong Kong government in the last few hours have no legal force. So I have one question for the Minister. Will he make every effort to persuade the executive in Hong Kong to halt the progress of these highly dangerous extradition amendments before Wednesday's crunch votes?
I thank the Honourable Lady for Bishop Auckland for her comments. I think it is a little unkind on officials, on ministers, but also more particularly on our excellent Consul General Andy Hayne, who has been out in Hong Kong as we have recognised this issue emerging as it has done for quite some time. And as I mentioned in my earlier comments, it is also fair to say that consistently, certainly in my 2 years as Minister, consistently we have, at every 6-monthly report, have expressed ongoing concerns about the deterioration, as we've seen it, in political and civil rights. It is probably fair to say that these proposals, the proposed extradition law, didn't originate at China's instigation, but there's no doubt that the Hong Kong government is now under some distinct pressure from Beijing. We believe that there have been obviously some opportunities have been missed to climb down, but even the huge public display of defiance, and as I say, it was up until the last few moments, it was very peaceable, the defiance that took place yesterday, combined of course with concerted opposition from the international business and legal communities, has not been able to turn the tide. May I say this to the Honourable Lady? Of course we will do all that we can. In fact, Andy Hayne is, I believe in London this week, but his very able assistant Esther Blythe is back in Hong Kong. We will do all that we can to make further urgent representations to the Hong Kong government. If I may say this, Mr Speaker, this issue I think has highlighted that it is not the Chief Executive, not even the Legislative Council, that can provide an effective check to external influence to Hong Kong, but it is the presence and continuance of an independent judicial system. And obviously, again, as the Honourable Lady rightly alluded to, this now looks as though we're heading towards a potential pitting of the Hong Kong judicial system squarely against that from Beijing.
Stephen Crabb.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I do agree with the Minister. The United Kingdom has a serious and special obligation to defend civil liberties in Hong Kong. Does the Minister agree with the assessment of these new extradition amendments as described to me last week in a note by one of the leaders of the pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong, where she describes this bill, if passed, says will have destructive effects on our civil liberties as well as on our economy? Does the Minister agree with that assessment, and does he feel that we are discharging our obligation to defend civil liberties in Hong Kong as fully as we could at the present time?
May I thank my right honourable friend for Pressley Pembrokeshire. I would broadly agree with what has been said, and obviously the work of democracy and diplomacy ensures, hopefully, that we are able to do our best, both to push back, but to advise and to express the very deep concerns. One only needs to look, I think, at the recent 6 monthly reports to recognise there has been an increasing buzz of concern on our side and indeed from many in Hong Kong in relation to this matter. And it is in particular, I think, this extradition treaty that clearly has also engaged many in the business community, many who have felt, in fact, for the last 21 years that things have been broadly, last 22 years, as it almost is, that have been broadly positive. And one of the messages we put to our counterparts, if I may, in Beijing, is to say that obviously for their own plans, whether it is on the Belt and Road or indeed on other economic initiatives to be fully successful, requires a strong Hong Kong, because Hong Kong, particularly with its unique legal system, does provide an opportunity for substantial capital markets. Therefore, the great success of Hong Kong, I think, relies upon that high degree of autonomy being maintained.
Hugh Grant.
Mr Speaker, can I congratulate the Honourable Lady for securing the question and thank you for granting it. Anyone who saw last week the remarkable documentary that Kate Adie made to mark the 30th anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre doesn't need to be reminded just what respect for human rights can sometimes mean to the government of China. And although people will say that China has moved on from then, they haven't moved on enough even to admit that Tiananmen Square ever happened, never mind to apologise for the relatives of all those who were killed. Most people in China don't know that the weekend's protests happened because the Chinese government makes absolutely sure they're not allowed to know that people in Hong Kong are protesting. That is the extent of the ongoing repression of human rights in China, and we should all be concerned that similar repression of human rights will start to be inflicted on the people of Hong Kong as well. Normally in an extradition treaty you can't be extradited for a crime that is not a crime in the country being extradited from. That won't apply. China won't respect that to get a treaty with Hong Kong. Normally, you can't be extradited to a country where you're not going to get a fair trial. Does anyone seriously believe that protection will be respected for anyone in Hong Kong? So given the concerns that we have, and I welcome some of the assurances the Minister has given, but can he say a bit more about what action the United Kingdom is taking just now through the United Nations, for example, so that all possible international diplomatic pressure is brought to bear, not just on Hong Kong, but more importantly on China, to make sure that this law never becomes effective? And secondly, given that China is one of the countries that we're supposed to be looking to very, very keenly for a trade deal, can we get an assurance that under no circumstances will the prospect of a trade deal allow the voice of the United Kingdom and our allies in Europe to be silenced when it comes to speaking up in defence of the rights of people to whom the United Kingdom continues to owe both a legal and a moral responsibility?
Hear, hear. Minister.
May I thank the honourable gentleman from the SNP for his comments, and I will try to answer. I mean, certainly in relation to the specifics of trade deals, is obviously not my place in the Foreign Commonwealth Office to say any more than this, that clearly we will and continue and will relentlessly express any concerns we have around human rights in relation to any country with whom we are looking to strike a trade deal. That said, this is a particular circumstance, obviously, because of the nature of the joint declaration. He rightly points out, and has been mentioned by a number of members of the House, even during the course of this afternoon. This is a document signed between the UK and China in 1984, which is now lodged with the United Nations, and therefore that clearly is one mechanism by which we can try and stand up for its terms. As I say, back in 2016 there was a particular episode where we thought the joint declaration was being abused, and if we feel that we do not get the changes that we're looking for in this extradition law going forward, then we will use whatever means that we can. The Hong Kong government released a statement at 11 o'clock last night, Hong Kong time, noting the right of Hong Kong people to their freedom of expression and assembly, but insisting the bill would continue to the next reading, which, as members have pointed out, takes place this Wednesday. I believe that the Chief Executive, Carrie Lam, reiterated that message on television in Hong Kong this morning, Hong Kong time, and we are obviously looking to try and ensure that whatever safeguards are put into place during the course of the next 2 or 3 days, that we will try and ensure that they are as watertight as is possible. But this is an ongoing discussion, and I hope the honourable gentleman will recognise that we will want to leave open all of our options.
Sir Desmond Swade.
But, Mr. Speaker, beyond the Minister's evident charm, what leverage do we actually have?
Minister.
I thank my right honourable friend for his ever charming and succinct questions. I know he's got them obviously from the school of the Speaker in that regard. The reality of the situation is, as we have pointed out, this is an international document that is signed with the UN. It is something that not just we take seriously, but many other international partners. And I hope he was reassured when he heard what I had to say about our joint discussion with our Canadian counterparts. Obviously, there are a significant number of Canadian nationals, of course, who live and work in Hong Kong as well, as recently as the 30th of May. But I think the message that comes loud and clear, one we have to take on board that my right honourable friend for President Pembrokeshire said earlier on. We need, as an international community, to ensure that we work together. This clearly is a crucial point in Hong Kong's history, and our leverage, our legal leverage may be more limited than we would wish, but I think by working together we can maximise that.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And of course, the worries about this breaking of the firewall and the possible intrusion into one country, two systems, they wouldn't exist if there weren't serious concerns about egregious breaches of human rights in China. So can I ask the Minister what further information he can perhaps give us on discussions between the UK government and the Chinese government about improving human rights in China generally?
Well, as I pointed out to the Honourable Lady, I think in the previous exchanges we've had in the House, we do never stint from making clear concerns, whether it is to do with the issues obviously in the northwest of the country in Xinjiang, or more general issues around human rights. Clearly we have a strong diplomatic relationship with China. It involves working together, and actually working together in a very productive way in a range of areas, from money laundering to people trafficking, in relation obviously increasingly towards climate change and other areas. And building up that body of trust also involves being able to have some robust conversations about human rights matters. I know from the highest possible level, when the Prime Minister spoke to President Xi, certainly when I speak to my counterparts in both Beijing and in other cities, we do not stint from making clear particular concerns, where there are concerns that we have either on consular matters or indeed more generally around human rights.
Steve Double.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier this afternoon, coincidentally, I met with a group of students from Hong Kong who are studying here, who are British National Overseas Passport holders, and they are obviously very concerned about the recent developments in relation to China. So can I ask the Minister what consideration his department have given to the effect that these proposed changes would have on BNO passport holders in Hong Kong, and what steps the Foreign Office has taken to provide ongoing support and advice to BNO passport holders in Hong Kong?
May I thank my honourable friend for St Austell and Newquay for his comments. He is absolutely right that we have obviously some significant obligations to British National Overseas Passport holders. He will be aware that the right of abode in the UK was defined by the Immigration Act in 1971, and therefore there are immigration controls to which BNO passport holders are subject to. Clearly, the rights they have are not the full rights of British citizens, but nonetheless, as people who are British nationals having been from Hong Kong. It is something that we do take very seriously. I hope my honourable friend will forgive me if I may just say that I will write him in due course with trying to answer some of the specific issues that he has put into place, and in particular, obviously, whether there have been any changes that have been afoot since 1997 in regard to the rights of such individuals.
Alistair Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The second reading of the bill to implement these changes will take place on Wednesday. Legislators in Hong Kong tell me today that they anticipate that thereafter the remaining stages of that bill could be completed as early as the middle of the week after next. If that happens, then clearly the Minister's aspiration for more consultation will be dead in the water. What will the Minister do then?
I thank the honourable gentleman, right honourable gentleman, for what he has said. Clearly, it would be a grave concern. There has been, as I say, a almost universal view, not just from those who were on the streets of Hong Kong yesterday, but increasingly from business organisations based in Hong Kong and indeed from around the world who are asking for greater consultation. I'd rather not speculate as to where we might be if the path to which he has pointed out is taken over the next 10 days, and I sincerely hope that that will not come to pass. And, Mr. Speaker, you may be aware that Right Honourable has the adjournment debate, so we'll be covering a little bit of this ground, but I hope he will forgive me that I would want to talk more generally about UK, Hong Kong and indeed China relations during the course of that debate later on.
Well, I'm most grateful for that public information announcement by the Minister of State. It is, I think, potentially of interest to people observing our proceedings that debate will indeed be resumed in the form of the adjournment debate tonight under the auspices of the Right Honourable Gentleman from Orkney and Shetland, specifically on UK foreign policy in relation to China and Hong Kong. Moreover, I myself will have the great honour and privilege tomorrow night of hosting a dinner in support of Hong Kong Watch, which, to put it bluntly, is a splendid organisation that has really been set up to keep an eye on what the Chinese government is up to in relation to Hong Kong. And that organisation is magnificently led on a day-to-day basis by the estimable Ben Rogers, who, as I speak, might well be in our midst. Order. Stay